So, let's see. Can you hear me? Great. At least I can hear myself. That's a good start. So, everyone, very welcome to Luleå and to the stakeholder dialogue session that concludes the fourth Trade and Technology Council. And as Sweden's Minister for Development Cooperation and Foreign Trade, I am very pleased to welcome all of you here to Luleå. And we can look forward to a very interesting event with two topical panel discussions. The first panel will focus on furthering the green transition through the transatlantic marketplace. And the topic of the second panel will be perspectives on large AI models. So together, these two panels, they will cover both trade and technology aspects. And I will be moderating the first discussion, and Dr. Andrea Renda of the Center for European Policy Studies will moderate the second panel discussion. And in order to hear as much as possible from our distinguished panel, I suggest that we begin the discussions straight away. And as you can see, we have a very high-level panel here today. From the United States government, Secretary of State Antony Blinken, Secretary of Commerce Gina Raimondo, and the United States Trade Representative Ambassador Catherine Tai. And the European Commission is represented by Executive Vice President Valdis Dombrovskis, Executive Vice President Margrethe Vestager, and Commissioner Thierry Breton. And of course, representing stakeholders from both sides of the Atlantic, we have Karin Lexén from the European Environmental Bureau. We have Antoine Augier from the Green Trade Network, Peter Carlson from Northvolt, Anne Mettler from Breakthrough Energy. We have Samantha Smith of the AFL-CIO, and Marjorie Shorlins of the US Chamber of Commerce. So the theme of this panel is very wide, furthering the green transition through the transatlantic marketplace. We could talk about that for hours, but I would like the discussion here today to focus on three different aspects. First of all, the transatlantic marketplace as a backbone of sustainable and resilient, secure, and diversified supply chains. I also hope to cover clean incentives for transatlantic decarbonization efforts, and of course also an innovative and clean technology-driven transatlantic marketplace. And in order to hear as much as possible from our stakeholders representatives, we will begin here today by brief statements from three TTC principals, followed by statements from each of the stakeholders. And I also hope that we will be able to spend some time on an open discussion among all the panelists. So I would like to give the floor now to European Commission Executive Vice President Valdis Dombrovskis. Valdis, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Johan, dear panelists. Well, first of all, we are happy to be here in Luleå, which is a center of new industrial revolution for a more green and sustainable future. It's very timely that we discuss how TTC can contribute to driving the green transition forward. Both European Union and United States are committed to lead the fight against climate change, and Trade and Technology Council can make important contribution to this effort, because it's a great example of a multidisciplinary platform that builds on digital and trade expertise. So the thinking behind it's simple. If we are to maintain global leadership and prevail in standard setting in today's geopolitical climate, the EU and US cannot afford to have two separate green markets emerging on each side of the Atlantic. So we can gain much more by working together to promote a fair, competitive, innovative environment where our companies, our workers, our consumers can thrive, and also resilient environments that can withstand sudden shocks or ruptures in supply chains. The Transatlantic Initiative on Sustainable Trade aims to build long-lasting bilateral engagement for promoting more integrated and resilient transatlantic marketplace and to use trade in accelerating green transition. By defining ambitious work program for Transatlantic Initiative of Sustainable Trade, we want to show that trade policy can make a significant and mutually reinforcing contribution to green transition both in EU and US. And actually, this work program is one of the major results that we can that we achieved in this ministerial meeting in Luleå. So it basically revolves around boosting transatlantic marketplace, taking steps to enhance the resilience of our supply chains, and strengthening our bilateral cooperation on advancing green transition globally. And this also complements our clean energy incentives dialogue, which was launched by the presidents in March, also as a way to ensure that our respective incentives and public fund are mutually reinforcing. So I will stop here. Thank you very much, and I now hand over to Catherine.
To drive urgent climate action, from presidential directives like the 2021 executive order to fight climate change to landmark legislation like the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act. We want our trading partners to recognize with us, by working together, that acting to protect the climate is good for our businesses, for our workers, and for our economies, not just critical for the environment. As we seek to reduce our carbon footprints and benefit our industries, we're each bound to do things that cause anxiety for the other side, whether it's on the EU side, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, or from the US side, the Inflation Reduction Act. But our shared ambition to tackle climate challenges is what is important. It creates an opportunity for us to work together to tackle the existential crisis that threatens all of us and our future generations. I wanted to highlight that we are continuing our negotiations between the US and the EU. And you heard Valdis talk about putting the US and the EU markets together on a transatlantic basis to drive the kinds of change and that race to the top that we know that this inflection point is creating an opportunity for us to do. The global arrangement will be, when we get there, which will be this fall, right, Valdis? Yes. The world's first carbon-based sectoral arrangement to address carbon intensity and overcapacity in the steel and aluminum sector. This arrangement, I am confident, will be historic. It will help us to achieve our sustainability goals by reducing emissions, defending key industries and jobs, and spurring that race to the top, while also addressing unfair competition from non-market economies and sources of overcapacity like China, but not solely China. Together, we're demonstrating that trading partners can align on common objectives and use trade tools to decarbonize our economies and drive cleaner trade. Lastly, President Biden has instructed me to bring a new approach to trade that advances the needs of our workers, protects the environment, and creates an inclusive prosperity. I just want to highlight the fact that the EU is, once again, our premier partner in manifesting a new paradigm for doing trade, something that pursues a positive vision for our future, is focused on decarbonization, but also has the welfare and the livelihoods of our workers at the heart. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Tai. I will now give the floor to United States Secretary of State Antony Blinken.
Johan, thank you very, very much. At the risk of repetition, I think you'll hear me in violent agreement with my friends and colleagues. But the first thing I want to say is this. It is so critical to us that not only are we having this stakeholders meeting, but that everything we do is infused with the views, the perspectives, the experience of the stakeholders. It's a critical part of the TTC. One of the things I think we've learned, those of us who've been in government for some time now, including myself, is that more than ever before, if we do not have stakeholders with us on the takeoff of every big issue, they're probably not going to be there on the landing, and what we do is not going to be sustainable. So we place tremendous value on having all of you here, but not just today, every day as we're working through these challenges. And whether you traveled here in person, whether you're actually with us virtually today in some fashion, or many who are sharing their views in writing, thank you, thank you, thank you, because it's an integral part of this process that we've established. And I also want to give a special shout out to the students among us who are here today. It's a cliche to say that what we're doing, what we're working on, will shape the future that you inherit. But there's another part of that, which is you need, and we're counting on you to help us do that shaping. This is not simply something that we're doing now that we're eventually going to hand off to you. It's vitally important that your voices, your views, your perspectives be included. By definition, every new generation has a new way at looking at the challenges that we're facing at any particular time, and none of us have a monopoly on ideas, never mind good ideas. So your engagement's critical, and again, it's not just thinking about the future; it's actually the present, the now, where we really want that engagement. Working together, I think we share the same objective, and that is to build a clean infrastructure and develop clean technologies for the future. This has the obvious imperative of addressing the climate challenge. It also, I think, we're convinced, has the tremendous benefit of actually building new economies for the future that are going to be, or certainly can be, powerfully beneficial to all of the constituent elements of those economies, whether it's our workforce, whether it's our companies, whether it's our societies as a whole. Now, none of this happens automatically, none of it's easy, and we know that there are huge challenges in getting from here to there. But we're equally convinced that if we are able to do this together, we actually can succeed and can do this effectively. Some of us just came from a G7 meeting a few weeks ago, where on one level, the good news is that the G7 countries, if you look at them, have each made commitments that, if fulfilled, and that's a big if, would keep global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. So that's the sort of good news. The less good news is the same cannot be said of the G20, and the same cannot be said if you go out even beyond the G20. So even in just making sure that we have the appropriate ambitions, again, the G7 is in a pretty good place, but we need to build out from there, and that was some of the work that we actually were doing at the G7. So we have a shared goal. We need to make sure that everyone is adapting and adopting the plans necessary to reach it. But then, of course, that's not enough. We actually have to implement them. And that's really where we know the challenge lies. But again, I think if we're able to not only have the vision necessary, but actually convince all of our constituents that we can, all of us, wind up in a better place, we can get there. The governments and private sectors have an enormous challenge in actually advancing a fair and efficient clean energy transition at a scale and pace that's needed to achieve the goals. So it is bringing this up to scale, and then of course it's moving quickly on it. We all know that the decisions and the actions that we take over the next 7 years, the remainder of this decade, are going to determine whether or not we're able to reach the goals that many of us have set for halfway through this century, 2050. One other thing I just wanted to emphasize, and it's something that Valdis and Catherine also touched on. When we're looking at this question of fairness, we want to ensure not only a level playing field, as vital and as important as that is, we're also working through the TTC, including, for example, via the semiconductor early warning system that we've established, through the clean energy incentives dialogue that you've heard alluded to try to build sustainable, resilient supply chains that are free, for example, from forced labor and immune from economic coercion. Those are vital aspects of the future too. And we have strong constituencies that are insisting that we move in that direction. We also use the TTC to actually elevate environmental, social, and government standards as we build diverse, sustainable, and secure supply chains. Ultimately, what we're about, if we do things right, is creating a race to the top, not a race to the bottom. And if it's a race to the top that everyone participates in, no matter where they're from, no matter which country they are, that's a good thing. And that's what we want to encourage. As you heard Valdis say as well, it's so vitally important that we coordinate together through the TTC to make sure that, for example, some of the incentives that we're putting in place to create that race to the top are properly coordinated and don't actually inadvertently create some kind of zero-sum game race to the bottom. On both sides of the Atlantic, we have now unleashed incredibly powerful incentives to try to drive innovation and complement and spur private sector investment. But we've got to do it in a way, again, that is complementary. So the incentives dialogue that we've established, that was announced by President Biden and Commission President von der Leyen back in March, not only ensures that the incentive programs are mutually reinforcing, but it also facilitates sharing information and also joint action to address the non-market practices that some are engaged in, including China. Finally, all of this is very resource intensive, but money is not the only challenge that we face. There are other issues that are vitally important that we discuss, all of us together, that are obstacles in the way of the faster deployment of clean technology at a scale so that we can actually make a difference. Developing new clean technologies like solid state batteries of the future, hydrogen and other clean fuels, carbon capture technologies, all of these require a whole ecosystem of support beyond simply the financial resources or subsidies that may come along. Creating the technological industrial base on both sides of the Atlantic requires all of us to engage, to do more, and especially to listen to each other, to make the necessary adjustments, because some of this, it's so new that there's trial and error involved. It's iterative, and we're going to make mistakes. We have to adjust to them. And we're taking big bets on ultimately our most important asset, and that's the innovators and investors, some of whom are in the audience today, who are really fundamentally going to drive all of this progress. Governments ultimately, I think, have to be about facilitating, catalyzing, sometimes simply getting out of the way, as well as making sure that, to the best of our ability, the standards that we set for ourselves, that society ultimately wants and demands, that we're safeguarding those as well. And that's a challenging balancing act. So again, I'm really grateful for the fact that we brought everyone here together. Johan, thank you for kicking us off. And I think most of us are just eager to listen to our colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Blinken. And we now heard from the three TTC principals, so I would like to give the floor to the first of our 6 stakeholder representatives, which is Peter Carlsson, CEO of Northvolt. Peter.
And thank you for being invited here. I represent Northvolt. We build batteries, which is obviously essential, an essential technology in the green transition. An hour and a half south of here, we're building one of the largest battery setups in Europe. We've invested over $3 billion in an integrated factory that will deliver the lowest carbon footprint of any battery in the world. Roughly, it is today a fourth of the carbon footprint versus the Asian batteries that is right now driving the transition. And if you look at this at scale, this is pretty important. At the end of the decade, we will be at the 10th of the carbon footprint of an Asian equivalent. And the way we drive this transition, the way we drive the electric car transition, will determine whether we will create a carbon footprint the size of Spain's or whether we will avoid it. And that's where I think the collaboration between Europe and North America is incredibly important, because on the sustainability area, we have very similar values, and we can drive a common market and a common playing ground, preventing us to defy what we really want, which is driving a green transition. We also have, we have advantages in technology, we have advantages in quality, we have disadvantages in the scale of the industry. And at this point of time, we can together, if we collaborate, we can mitigate those by creating a very, very efficient market. The U.S. with the IRA has been, a very efficient program in driving investments. And these investments, and Europe is coming there, these investments are incredibly important because they are about the jobs going forward in the automotive industry. These are about the university. This is about technology leadership. And creating these regional investments is incredibly important. The last thing I want to point out is the collaboration around the strategic supply chains. Right now, for example, over the last 6 years, we have seen a 30% nickel increase in world global production. It's all in Indonesia. It's all driven by Chinese and Korean players. I think Europe and US need to collaboratively work together on building supply chain on strategic raw materials, because this is so crucial in this green transition. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. And our second stakeholder today is Anne Mettler, Vice President Europe of Breakthrough Energy.
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you for the invitation. So please allow me to start off by actually citing a study that the Cleantech Group is launching today with the support of Breakthrough Energy, entitled Transatlantic Cleantech Investment Towards a Green Transatlantic Marketplace. Now, what you'll find in the study is really some very positive trends. For example, between 2012 and 2022, participation by US investors in EU cleantech deals rose 7-fold, while EU investors became 3 times more active in US deal making. And this, of course, occurred in the complete absence of any formal political process and apart from the Transatlantic Green Alliance that the US and the EU committed to launch. So imagine the potential of a green transatlantic marketplace that actually receives some political support, that would actively bring together cleantech, the cleantech community on both sides of the Atlantic, and that would align regulation and standards at an early stage in the development of a new generation of clean technologies. Now, ladies and gentlemen, frontier technologies and innovation prowess are no longer just an economic or a trade issue. They are geopolitics, hard security, strategic sovereignty. Being a leader in cleantech innovation means tackling the climate crisis, but it also means shoring up energy resilience and boosting competitiveness at a moment when the stakes truly couldn't be higher. Don't waste this opportunity. The costs of fragmented markets, duplicative subsidies, and divergent regulatory regimes are too high at a moment of such volatility and systemic competition. We simply cannot afford a repeat of the digital revolution when Europe and the US went their separate ways and are still trying to sort out their difference, as I believe the TTC is well aware of. Therefore, my urgent plea, as we're on the cusp of a new technology revolution, the cleantech revolution, let's recognize that bigger markets matter. Speed to market matters. The ease and the scale of technology deployment matters. The more aligned we are, the more attractive we are as an investment destination. The more we can leverage our soft power to set the world's best standards, the more we can grow the pie together rather than bicker over how we divide a shrinking one. Concretely, I asked this body to do 3 things. Firstly, open up the TTC process to the cleantech community to help identify where there is scope and need to align. Secondly, infuse this body with some commercial logic and know-how, and double down on the ambition that we must once again lead the technology frontier. And finally, build a transatlantic marketplace for green goods and services. As I pointed out earlier, the marketplace for green investment is already there and it's thriving. So it's something we should and we must build on now. And I'm looking to the TTC to make this happen. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Anne. And we will now hear the views of Karin Lexén, President of European Environmental Bureau. Karin, the floor is yours.
So thank you so much. It's a great honor to be part of this conversation. And as said, it's my role to convey the perspective of the civil society. Maybe the notion that our planet Earth is alone from our children may be a good way to illustrate our point of departure. So we do believe that innovation, new technology, and trade are important vehicles, really important vehicles for the green transition, given, as already pointed out, within the sustainable boundaries and in respecting human rights. So we believe that the TTC has a very important role to play. My first point of view would be that to establish a resilient supply chain, it is crucial to first identify the sources of demand and then implement appropriate strategy to mitigate these demands and to make priorities. Even if more strategic raw materials will be coming into the market in the coming years, it's important that we increase the product lifetime. For this, we must go beyond merely advocating recycling and emphasizing also reuse and repair and other strategies. And this is not only saving a lot of emissions of carbon dioxide, it's also creating a lot of jobs. Second, the green transition is about decarbonization, but not only. Climate change mitigation must go hand in hand with nature protection and restoration. The World Economic Forum 2023 Global Risk Report points out that nature loss and climate change are closely interlinked, and that a failure in one sphere will cascade into the other. So even if tackling the climate change sometimes conflict with nature, it's really important that decisions on priorities must be made in a holistic and in a long-term strategy. Third, human rights and indigenous peoples' rights, including the free, prior and informed consultation, must be respected and fully integrated in all processes, not only for the sake of the communities that are directly affected by the impacts, but also since the foundation of a sustainable and safe society is respect and dignity. So being here in Sweden, I must emphasize that the rights of the Sami people must be respected and honored in the green transition. So finally, I do believe that we need now more than ever cooperation and dialogue across borders and sectors. So I very much appreciate the possibility of taking part in this conversation.
Thank you, Karin. And our fourth stakeholder representative is Samantha Smith, Strategic Advisor for Clean Energy Jobs at the American Federation of Labor and Congress of Industrial Organizations. Please.
Yes, thank you very much, Minister, and thanks to Secretary Blinken and the U.S. Trade Representative Catherine Tai, and to you, Executive Vice President Dombrovskis, for convening us. Clean energy and climate change are huge priorities for the AFL-CIO and for the American labor movement. That's a relatively new development. And it is in large part because the IRA, the CHIPS and Science Act, the Infrastructure and Investment in Jobs Act, these gigantic federal investments in our economy and in clean energy, because they have labor standards attached to them. And while you can always want more as a trade unionist, nonetheless, these investments are going to create and secure millions of good union jobs. And that is absolutely critical for us and for our members. And if we want to have prosperous and stable democracies, it's important that we are building support for them also by doing things that are good for workers and that are worker-centered. I'll just explain why. I mean, a lot of our members care very deeply about climate change and the green transition. But every single one of our members, and over 70% of American workers, cares about getting a good union job. And so building that support through good union jobs is a key part of this legislation, and that's why we are so much in favor of it. It's not just us. We're an international movement, so we talk, for example, to our European trade union sisters and brothers, our siblings, all the time. And we know that this is something that matters to them too. Having high labor standards that are attached to government subsidies and incentives, to trade, and also to corporate practices, that matters to European workers. It matters to workers in every country where you have trade unions. So we are all fully aligned, even if sometimes our governments are not, about what we'd like to see happen in this green transition. We want every job that comes out of this green transition to turn into a good union job. Let me make two concrete proposals. So the first is that there are these huge investments by the EU and the US in the green transition. And it would be great if the EU and the US, if our countries could work together to ensure that the highest labor standards are attached to these investments. Again, creating these good union jobs that all of us want. And second, we'd also like to propose an MOU between the EU and the US to have a formal process to work on establishing what we would in the US call high road supply chains for certain green goods that are going to be critical to this transition. And just as examples, really in the EU, European countries, US, we're spending billions of dollars or euro on solar panels and photovoltaic cells. And we need to have secure supply chains that exclude forced labor and that also are going to make sure that the people making this stuff have secure, safe jobs with rights and with all the benefits of freedom of association and freedom of expression. So those are our two proposals. Thanks very much for the opportunity to put them forward.
Thank you, Samantha. And I would now like to give the floor to Antoine Auger, Head of Program at the Green Trade Network.
Thank you very much, Minister. And so, yes, I come here with a double hat as a Head of Program for IEP, which is a think tank based in Brussels, but also as a coordinator of the Green Trade Network, which is a new initiative, a collection of experts on trade issues, discussing sustainable trade issues, and providing, and I insist on that, evidence-based solutions. So why do we try and take time from such busy people? Well, it comes from a dire conclusion from the IPCC. The idea that climate change is causing widespread impact to ecosystem, people, and infrastructure throughout the planet. And that is arguably the single most important cost that our economies will have to face in the coming decades. Yet, these impacts and these costs are associated with a great degree of uncertainty as to where, how, and to what, with how strongly they will manifest, which complicates our policy response from a risk assessment perspective. So in the face of such risk and such costs, we are convinced that trade is part of the solution. Trade is fundamentally a flux, a facilitator, an accelerator even, between an exporter benefiting from additional market opportunities and an importer that benefits from better access to potentially crucial commodities, goods, and services. And investment is the other side of that coin that provides the means to these stakeholders to actually operate. So the key question is, what do we facilitate through trade and investment? What sector, what good, what services? We should leverage that tool that we have, these tools that we have, trade and investment, to foster our mitigation effort through the decarbonization of our economies and facilitate our adaptation to a new and potentially a more challenging world. We must use trade when it supports that objective. But that also means that we should not be afraid of taking a more cautious approach to trade when it's accelerating quality fuels activities that can be detrimental to the climate as well. So proposing adequate, realistic solutions on how to do that is really at the heart of our actions. We try to find solutions that can be fostered bilaterally, like here today, but also on the multilateral stage, as Secretary of State Blinken mentioned, for the process to be more inclusive internationally, and also to promote recommendations, regulations that can be ambitious regulations at home as well. So I am looking forward to today's discussion on how the EU and the US can collaborate to tackle this most important issue of our time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Antoine. And our last stakeholder in this panel is Mary Shorlins, Vice President Europe at the US Chamber of Commerce. Please.
Thank you, Minister, and good afternoon, everyone. I represent the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, which is the world's largest business association. We represent companies of all sizes across all sectors of the economy, ranging from large multinationals to the smallest mom and pop shops, as we call them, in the U.S. On Main Street. Look, I think just about everything that can be said about closer transatlantic collaboration on the green transition has been said. I don't want to repeat too much, but I just have a couple of key points. First, as the process towards the green transition races ahead, it's imperative that our governments keep up in terms of regulatory alignment on clean energy technologies, and in terms of things like aligning efforts on how to measure, monitor, and report on emissions. A harmonized emissions measuring methodology would eliminate a significant obstacle to trade and capture varying emissions outputs of goods. And this is particularly true in the natural gas value chain. So cooperation on regulatory, alignment on regulatory cooperation in the green sector is key. Likewise, cooperation on strategic minerals. This has already been mentioned, but worth underscoring. This is one of the most significant supply chain constraints we face today as we are striving towards this green transition. And it's essential that the US and Europe find ways to partner together in achieving, in securing these strategic minerals and reducing our dependency on a particular actor or actors. We simply cannot achieve our climate goals if we fail to increase our production of critical minerals by an estimated 500% by 2040. And when we think about critical minerals, we need to be thinking about the entirety of the supply chain and production chain for these goods. A key element when it comes to critical minerals, relates to permitting reform. Now, we've just seen some progress on this in the US, and we'd like to see more progress on this in Europe as well. Lastly, and this is a bit of a bank shot, as we say, in addition to promoting transatlantic cooperation on the green transition, the US and Europe also have to demonstrate leadership in multilateral fora. And so we think that it would be a critical element in promoting the green transition would be for the US and Europe to lead a resumption of the WTO Environmental Goods Agreement negotiations. While agreement on what constitutes an environmental good can be difficult to achieve, initiating conversations on supply chain resiliency, many of which are already occurring, including in the TTC, would be a very important step forward. Governments could equally consider identifying a target list of existing environmental technologies with defined impact and focus on eliminating not only tariffs, but also non-tariff barriers to deployment and commercialization. And an environmental goods agreement would be a small step, but an important one, not only to promote the green transition, but also, of course, to reaffirm the value of the World Trade Organization. One last point I'd like to make, and that is the inherent link between the green transition and the digital transition. These are the twin pillars driving this Commission's agenda. I would argue these same pillars are driving the American government's agenda nowadays. And it's important to remember that one cannot occur without the other. Thanks to that interconnected global economy, which is underpinned by data flows and e-commerce and the internet, we're able to seamlessly engage with one another. And through online meetings and things like that, we're all fed up with Zoom pandemic induced Zoom fatigue. But all of these are excellent ways to lower emissions and stay connected and boost our productivity. The digital sector is also one of the greenest parts of our economy, powered by a globally integrated cloud network, which is in turn overwhelmingly powered by solar and wind energy. Of course, all of the progress towards the green transition will be undermined if we're not able to finalize and implement a US-EU data privacy framework, or if new provisions under consideration, for example, here in Europe, require the localization of industrial data in Europe. It's important, it's critically important to get the digital and data policies right on both sides of the Atlantic in order to sustain our progress in the green transition. Thank you.
Thank you, Marjorie, and thank you, everyone. And we still have some time left now for discussion. And well, we've heard now about all of these important challenges that are ahead of us, and also about the opportunities. That's also important to underline. But while we are now here in the northern parts of Sweden, in Luleå, and we're having this fantastic TTC meeting, I think the obvious question for me to ask you in the panel now is, how do you believe that this TTC meeting that we've had can really leverage the role of the transatlantic marketplace and also promote this transition that everyone is talking about, the transition to a low carbon emissions economy? Who would like to start? Margrethe.
Is proof of concept of the Trade and Technology Council. That just really shows that this is working. It is delivering, it is tangible, and the promise for the future is even better. Because standardization is what we have heard all the time, and also said it, don't think about fragmentation. We cannot afford it, and with the geopolitics of this world, it will damage ourselves. So I think here, what we have seen is absolutely proof of concept of the Trade and Technology Council.
Thank you, Margrethe. Would anyone else like to comment on this? Samantha?
Sure. So the TTC, has already innovated and developed this transatlantic labor dialogue, bringing together social partners from Europe and from the United States. And it can also be a place where, again, Europe and the United States align on labor standards. So a lot has been said about aligning on technical standards and on measuring and reporting emissions from different value chains. This could be a place where we align on making sure all the jobs are good. And that in turn helps to align markets. It helps to level the playing field, and it helps to keep out bad actors. So maybe that could be a unique role for the TTC.
Thank you, Samantha. Anne?
Yes, so I agree with everything that was just said. I would encourage, though, that we focus particularly on frontier technologies. There'll be a whole slew of new clean technologies that we are developing now and deploying. And it's very important that you step in at an early stage in setting standards and in regulating, so that we don't have this divergence, as I mentioned, that we had with digital technologies. Please prevent that from doing, because this is very costly to companies, and it's also costly for governments, because you're both investing massively now in these new technologies. So this is one way to accelerate the deployment and the scaling that is so urgently needed. So please, and I know this is difficult for policymakers because you oftentimes don't know what the technology frontier is, but there are many out there who can help you define what it is and better understand it. Please use this body to not only look at mature technologies, but really the emerging clean technologies.
Thank you, Anne. Anyone else? Antoine?
Yes, thank you, Minister. Yes, I hope you pardon me to insist also on the Transatlantic Initiative on Sustainable Trade. That I understand that we've had good progress these 2 days as part of the TTC, which is something that we, of course, very much welcome. It's linked to things that have been discussed already a lot on the material recognition schemes, on the coming up with common standards that actually foster a green tech transatlantic market. So this is all something to be commended. I also wanted to, I'm sorry, I know that we are still in the conversation of today, but I would already like to project for the next one, as I understand that there's already some agreement to start talking of a transatlantic initiative on circular economy, perhaps that would be scheduled for the next TTC, TTC5, which I think is also something absolutely crucial if we want to develop the sort of trade fluxes that I was talking about in my preliminary statement, that what trade we want, and trade in secondary products that can be reused, remanufactured, etc., is absolutely crucial in opening new markets as well. So I also wanted to comment the conversation that have been happening here in the last 2 days and put a little pin on that circular economy one.
Thank you, Antoine. And talking about security, we've been addressing now the numerous opportunities and all the possibilities that lie ahead of us. But at the same time, one of the things that we've been discussing here today and also before is the question regarding the supply chain security and also how to reduce the excessive dependencies. How do you believe that the TTC can work in order to promote this?
Well, I think we've already demonstrated some approaches that can make a difference. For example, through the TTC, we've been developing an early warning system to be able to detect in real time challenges, threats, disruptions to supply chains. We've all, the hard way, learned a tremendous amount through COVID. We see the impact that disruptions in supply chains have. We also see the challenge of having non-diversified supply chains where we may have an over-reliance on any one source of supply that can get interrupted or disrupted. And through the TTC, we've been working to address that. I think the early warning system is one very good innovation where we're bringing everyone together, again, to be able to see in real time if there's an imminent disruption and to be able to take action before it's too late to avoid that disruption or to mitigate it.
Thank you. Valdis?
Indeed, you raised an important point on how we are not developing strategic dependencies, how we ensure resilient supply chains. Well, one answer, obviously, for resilience is diversification. So this brings us back both to our transatlantic green market, but also broader engagement with reliable partners around the world. Indeed, we have learned in a hard way on strategic dependencies. The one, for example, which we have developed on Russia's fossil fuel, notably natural gas supplies, which we had to unwind in a previous winter, which we did, but we know it was complicated and costly. And we also know that the green and digital economy will require different sets of inputs, different sets of raw materials, so we should not develop new strategic dependencies. So we need to have cooperation around the world with different partners to see that we have diversification of those raw material supplies. As you know, we are currently negotiating a critical minerals agreement with the United States. Okay, it serves a specific purpose to address some of the aspects of U.S. Inflation Reduction Act. But also today in TTC, we discussed that we need this broader cooperation in the area of raw materials. We actually agreed that we will be having this conversation in the framework of TTC, how we can cooperate in this area more broadly, because we are now at the stage where both EU and US are developing our raw materials strategies in the context of green transition. So it's important that we do it in a way which is to the extent possible aligned. Thank you.
Thank you, Valdis. Karin?
Yeah, thank you. I think that the TTC can really provide hope in a time where people desperately need hope and set good examples on how to proceed. And I'd like to come back to the demand side, the user side. And there's a lot of things that can be gained through reuse, through eco-design, through innovative techniques, both when it comes to reducing CO2 emissions, but also when it comes to create new jobs. So there you can be really innovative and secure the resources in a very good way. That is also good for the nature.
Thank you. Marjorie?
Yeah, I think two things. One, I think the TTC it has been and can be extraordinarily helpful in identifying joint solutions to shared challenges. I think that the kinds of solutions that we're looking for when it comes to the green transition require indeed effective, sustained, ongoing, detailed engagement with stakeholders. Because the technologies that are being developed, and some exist today, some are being developed, it requires policymakers to understand what is actually feasible, what is commercially viable, and what the sort of ecosystem has to look like in order for those technologies to be developed to get at our climate objectives. So I want to underscore the importance of continued stakeholder dialogue. The other thing I would say is that in the conversation about supply chains, supply chains are not only about more robust supply chains are not only about reducing our dependency on individual countries for particular products, but it's also about promoting trade in a transatlantic space. And this requires eliminating both market access barriers and non-tariff barriers. And so to the extent the TTC can be a mechanism to promote that aspect, that T of the TTC, we would like to see more of that. And I think that will help facilitate the green transition.
Thank you. Peter?
I'll bring a last angle. 3 years ago, we acquired a technology company in Silicon Valley, Cuberg, that brings a new battery technology, roughly 50% higher energy density than compared to what we see in our vehicles today, with the focus of implemented in next generation electrification, aviation, for example. There is a big uncertainty in that between Europe and US on how to certify electrification, electrical aviation, which also gives a little bit of uncertification or unclarity for investors of how should I bet on this technology if I don't know exactly the playing rules when it comes to certification. And this is an area, for example, where I think collaboration could be very, very welcome.
Thank you, Peter. And that concludes the first panel, but there is one more. And thank you everyone here during this first panel for your valuable thoughts. And I think you've provided us with many valuable ideas for the future. And I will now leave the floor to Dr. Andrea Arenda, who will moderate the second panel discussion.
Thank you. All right, we're going to start soon, and we'll ask everybody to take their seats because we are a little bit behind schedule. And we get started with the second panel. First panel has been absolutely fascinating, very rich conversation. I'm pretty sure the second panel will be equally interesting. I'll introduce myself first. My name is Andrea Arenda. I'm a senior fellow at the Center for European Policy Studies in Brussels. and I'm a professor of digital policy and AI policy at the European University Institute in Florence. I was a member of the high-level expert group on AI at the European Commission, and I'm the director of the Trade and Technology Dialogue, which is supporting the organization of this TTC4, but in general is an EU-funded project that supports the TTC in all its working groups with research and event organization. I'm even more particularly involved in this activity on AI that will be the subject of this panel, because I was asked by the European Commission to be a member of 2 of the 3 working groups that basically implement the roadmap on AI as part of Working Group 1. So today we will talk about generative AI in particular. It's a topic that needs, I would say, very little introduction. It is a topic that has raised excitement, a lot of concern, but also it has prompted policymakers, certainly on both sides of the Atlantic, to accelerate activities. And some of the stakeholders you see involved here have been also involved in those activities and frontline, and discussing with policymakers how to take action rapidly, because the concern and the opportunities that have emerged from these technologies have emerged even more rapidly than what we thought. So we're going to discuss 3 themes that are very interrelated. One is a basic question. Is it something genuinely new in terms of opportunities and risks? Second question is, if it's new, what can policymakers and industry leaders do about it? And third, what can the EU and the US do about it in order to promote their leadership in generative AI and also the prominence of the values they stand for? So we'll start with some welcome statements, as before, and then we will hear from our stakeholders invited to today's panel. So for this initial statements, I will invite first Executive Vice President Margrethe Vestager.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for making it so obvious that we're in very competent hands here today. Thank you for all you do for us. Artificial intelligence is a TTC stable. From the very first TTC meeting, we've been focusing on this, a shared approach to focus on the high-risk use cases and such, rather than regulating technology in itself. So we have the roadmap, we have the measurement tool, we have the ambition of having, a transatlantic approach to promote a transatlantic market for the best possible use of artificial intelligence, because the potential obviously is enormous. Now with generative AI, there is a seismic change, a categorical shift. Now technology is accelerating to a completely different degree than what we have seen before. You've heard the podcast, you've tried it yourself, you've heard all the potential benefits, productivity increases of 30%, but also the scare, this is the road to extinction. So obviously something needs to be done to get the most of this new technology. In Europe, we have the AI Act. It is well on track. Council, Parliament, very deep into this. The trilogues will start quite soon after the Parliament votes, and hopefully we'll have political agreement by end year. That will translate into an effect in, give or take, 2-3 years in the best possible case. And we're talking about technology that develops by the month. So what we have concluded here at this TTC is that we should take an initiative to get as many other countries on board on an AI code of conduct for businesses voluntarily to sign up. And that can then bridge whatever legislation may come in the different jurisdictions without prejudice to our parliaments and our councils, Congress, Senate, whatever we have, but to say, well, this is what we need right now. I think industry input is most welcome because I think it's crucially important. But I think it's also important to have a push from our side to say, well, this is what we expect. And I think it's really important that we think about the planet here. We would be more than happy to get it started, but obviously there are so many like-minded partners out there. Think about the G7. We have this AI Hiroshima process there as well. We have India, Indonesia as invited partners. I think if you take G7 and those two, we're about, 1/3 of global population. So we could really have effects if we get that right and get these businesses to say, this is what we will do as of now to keep us all safe from the risks of this technology and to enable a best possible use of this technology. And here I think the TTC is an obvious place for such an initiative to take off.
Thank you very much. And Secretary Raimondo, I give you the floor for your statement.
Thank you and good afternoon. I think that was extremely well said, and I'll just add a few comments. When we conceived of and began the TTC, we committed to ensuring that this body would deal with the most relevant issues of technology and really look at the ways that new technologies could help people in their everyday lives, in their everyday businesses, as they get healthcare, as they're educated, as they run their business, but also make the TTC relevant by ensuring that the technology was harnessed for good. AI couldn't be more relevant, yeah? And it is coming at a pace like no other technology. Like other technologies, we are already seeing issues with data privacy, misuse, what happens when the models get into the hands of malign actors, misinformation. Unlike other technology, the rate of the pace of innovation is at a breakneck pace, which is different and a hockey stick that doesn't exist in other technologies. In that respect, I think the TTC could play an incredibly relevant role because it will take a little bit of time for the US Congress or the Parliament or our other regulatory agencies to catch up, whereas the risk for some of AI is today. And so we are committed to making sure that the TTC provides a forum for stakeholder engagement, engagement of the private sector, engagement of our companies, to figure out what can we do in the here and now to mitigate the risks of AI, but also not to stifle the innovation. And that is a real challenge. We want to innovate. We want to continue to out-innovate at pace, but not so much that we can't afford to be extremely mindful of the risks and make sure that there are safeguards quite immediately. The final thing I'll say is, in addition to this stakeholder engagement, which we have today, but really every day, we need to do this in a global fashion. So the work that we're doing with the TTC will be folded into and augmented by all that we are doing in the G7, and as Margrethe said, also with with Indonesia and India. So for me, I'm very excited to hear what the stakeholders have to say and really just thankful for so much of your time.
Thank you very much, Secretary Raimondo, and very well said. It's now time to hear from our panelists. We have 6 panelists, 2 of which are virtually connected to this meeting. We will start with Jonas Androulis, who's the founder and CEO of Aleph Alpha. And each of you will have 4 minutes for your statements. And the 4 minutes will be a hard stop because we are a bit behind schedule. So look at this little number that you see on the screen. Once you start blinking, it's really time to wrap up, and otherwise I'm going to have to signal that to you. Jonas, the floor is yours, and thank you very much for being with us today.
All right, thanks for having me. I'll watch the number closely. I think we're all like a little bit dizzy. The speed of change, like everybody I know that is in AI is kind of stressed out, and with this technology, we are only even just scratching the surface. Basically, what we now have are incredibly well-trained stochastic parrots that kind of still lack some reasoning capabilities, but they're already so powerful that I think everybody can see them doing a substantial part in transforming knowledge work and changing basically a whole value chains that we operate on. And now we have this focus on this sector where world's smartest minds and giant amount of capital are all focusing on dominating that, getting that right, because everybody agrees the potential here is giant, and this technology will change the world, not only economical on a money basis, but also this technology will build the world that our children will live in. Every question, every text that we'll interact with will be shaped by whoever controls this technology. So I think the responsibility we have is not just an economical, but it ranges through all sectors of society. From our perspective, in what's happening in Europe, we're not working with European partners exclusively, but we're working with some of Europe's biggest companies. And we see that, of course, Europe has somewhat of a reputation for not being the fastest when it comes to innovation. And this is, again, something that we're seeing. Right? We're seeing some caution. We're seeing not like the biggest budgets, not the kind of most visionary activities. Usually, there's some phenomenal exceptions. And then, in addition to that, we do have the regulation. We do have some uncertainty coming through regulation. Many of our partners and customers we're talking with, they tell us that the risk of kind of missing compliance, the risk of changing laws, and the risk of a framework that is intentionally set out somewhat vague to then be later formalized by the standardization authorities, all this contributes to an environment where, and I'm happy to admit that Germany and parts of Europe are not necessarily risk-seeking, but maybe like more risk-averse. But this all contributes to an environment where developments are slow. And I fear that knowledge work is an important part of what is happening in Europe. A big part of the value that we're creating, it wouldn't be there without knowledge work, and knowledge work is currently changing. So this is an opportunity for us to build new empires, to build new value, but it's also a risk that we're losing a substantial pillar that we're standing on. What I would love is, other than basically limiting regulation to the kind of necessary part that is not inhibiting innovation, is also thinking about fairness, level playing field, and an environment where all the players, and this is not just the AI startups or the AI players, but pretty much this involves everybody, has the opportunity to act. We do have monopoly chains. We do have very strong forces that are present in this sector, ranging from like software, infrastructure, semiconductor, to like capital allocation. So I think thinking about how we can make this a fair playing field, because I think it's in everybody's interest that Europe will contribute to a safer future in AI.
Thank you very much, also for raising the issue of the infrastructure that comes with the AI, and also the need for a level playing field. It's now time to go to the other side of the stage, and we'll hear from the CEO and co-founder of Anthropic, Dario Amodei. Dario, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Andrea, and I'm honored to be invited to join the TTC and this stakeholder panel. At Anthropic, we think a lot about safety issues in AI systems and maximizing the benefits and helping to mitigate the harms. And when I think about the rate at which this technology is bringing new sources of power into the world, combined with the resurgent threat from autocracies that we're seeing over the last year, it seems to me that it's all the more important that we work together to prevent these harms and defend our shared democratic values. And the TTC seems like a critical forum for doing that. I'd like to briefly mention one specific opportunity for transatlantic collaboration within AI, but first I think it's worth maybe 60 seconds of background about the AI field that's relevant to this kind of policy and regulation. Specifically, two striking properties of AI right now are what I would call fast progress, which several people have alluded to, and poor measurement. On the first, it might appear from the outside that generative AI has burst onto the scene in the last 6 months or so, but for those of us inside it, it's been making steady progress in the last 10 years. More and more compute has been poured in, more and more compute has reliably led to better performance, and we're nowhere near the end of that curve. What we're going to be able to do in 1 to 4 years are things that seem impossible now. This is, I would say, if there's a central fact about the field of AI to know, this is the central fact to know. And though there will be many positive opportunities to come from this, I worry greatly about risks, particularly in the domain of cybersecurity, biology, things like disinformation, where I think there's the potential for great destruction. In the longer term, I worry even about the risks of truly autonomous systems. That's a little further out. The second point on measurement, I think we're very used to, when we think about regulation, technologies like automobiles or airplanes, where measuring safety is a secure field. You have a given set of tests you can run to tell if the system is safe. AI is much more of a Wild West than that. You can ask an AI system to do anything at all in natural language, and it can answer in any way it chooses to answer. You might try to ask a system 10 different ways whether it can conduct, say, a dangerous cyber attack, and find that it won't, but you forgot to ask it an 11th way that would have shown this dangerous behavior. A phrase I like to use is, no one knows what an AI system is capable of until it's deployed to 1 million people. And of course, this is a bad thing, right? We don't want to deploy these things in this cowboyish way. And so this difficulty of detecting dangerous capabilities is a huge impediment to mitigating them. I think both of these suggest that some kind of standards or evaluation are a crucial prerequisite for effective AI regulation. And both sides of the Atlantic have an interest in developing this science. Even if regulatory approaches taken by different countries are different, as I'm sure they will be, operating from the same base of facts seems important. So 2 things that might be valuable are a joint commitment to fund the development of standards and evaluations. Industry, civil society, academia, US and EU have a long tradition of collaborating on this, which we could extend. And then maybe more radically, a commitment to adopt an eventual set of common standards and evaluations as a sort of raw material for the rules of the road in AI. I also think that if we succeeded on evaluations, in addition to serving as raw material, this would promote confidence and trust in the technology among our citizens, who right now rightfully don't really know what they're getting. And second, to the extent that we can identify truly dangerous capabilities, evaluations will be an important tool for helping us design measures such as export controls that can keep models out of the hands of the militant autocracies that we've increasingly been worried about over the last couple of years. So that's my suggestion. And again, honored to be here with everyone here, and hope we can all work together to reinforce our common democratic values.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dario. Standards and evaluations. I know that in the US, there's been recent developments in terms of the public assessment of existing generative AI systems. Maybe I'll get back to you with having a little bit more information about that. Also in terms of how you're going to measure and what kind of metrics and frameworks you're going to use in order to provide that public assessment. Now it's time to go online and hear from Alexandra Riv Givens, who's the president and CEO of the Center for Democracy and Technology. Alexandra, thanks so much for being with us. I give you the floor.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the opportunity to let me join remotely from morning in Washington, D.C. My nonprofit organization, the Center for Democracy and Technology, works to protect human rights and democratic values in the digital age. Others have spoken well today about the positive uses of generative AI, and there's no question that there are such uses to be excited about. Generative AI tools are allowing people already to express themselves in new ways, to bring images from their imagination to life, and for some people to find new efficiencies and opportunities in how they work. And this is just the beginning of these tools. But as Dario set up well, the risks are real, and they're manifesting already. We're seeing already the professional, reputational, and potential physical harms when people rely on generated text results as accurate, unaware of the likelihood of hallucinations or fabricated results. There's the risk that generative AI tools will supercharge fraud, as tools make it easier to quickly generate personalized scams or to trick people by impersonating a familiar voice. There are risks of deepfakes that misrepresent public figures in a way that threatens elections, national security, or general public order. And there are risks of fake images being used to harass, exploit, and extort people. None of these harms are new, but they're made cheaper, faster, and more effective by the ease and accessibility of generative AI tools. So in this context, it's particularly gratifying to see the US and EU continuing their dialogue through the TTC. I'll briefly share 4 priorities for your consideration. The first is to recognize that while generative AI is grabbing headlines around the world, there are other uses of AI that are directly impacting people's rights, freedoms, and access to opportunity today. From the use of AI to determine who gets a job or receives public benefits, to the use of AI surveillance tools by law enforcement and more. Policymakers cannot lose sight of those core issues, even as they expand their focus to generative AI. Second is the important work that must happen on measuring AI harms and the effectiveness of mitigation strategies, the exact themes that Dario just set up. Whether as part of the TTC efforts, in assessing new voluntary initiatives, or in passing regulations, policymakers must be crystal clear that efforts to evaluate and manage AI risk must meaningfully address the full spectrum of real-world harms. What I mean by that is that policymakers must ensure AI audits and assessments are rigorous, comprehensive, and escape issues of capture. Policymakers must address the danger that frameworks for measuring risk often address only those harms that can be easily measured, which privileges economic and physical harms over equally important harms to people's privacy, dignity, and the right not to be stereotyped or maligned. As policymakers in the US and the EU look to industry efforts or technically oriented standards bodies to consider questions of measuring and managing risk, they must ensure these fundamental rights-based concerns are appropriately addressed. Third, the TTC roadmap calls for joint tracking of emerging risks and incidents of harms. This is really valuable work, and it should be lifted up and expanded, because information asymmetry is a significant barrier for policymakers and civil society as we assess the potential risks of AI tools. Whether we're discussing generative AI or AI decision-making tools, the US and the EU should enhance their information gathering strategies and share findings with domestic policymakers and the public sphere. Robust information about incidents of harm will help us all work from a common foundation. Finally, and perhaps most critically, the TTC's work must more deeply engage civil society voices, a point that's also true for domestic AI efforts and the standards processes I referenced earlier. I'm very grateful to be in this space, but the participants in AI governance conversations are often self-selecting, people who feel comfortable in a technical realm. Impacted communities and other civil society voices must have a seat at the table, which is to say they must be invited in or met where they are to share their perspectives and expertise. Not only will these conversations benefit from such engagement, but the TTC's reach and impact will be that much greater if communities on both sides of the Atlantic can benefit from the pathways being built here today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Alexandra. This also brings back a little bit to the role that civil society can have and also researchers can have in publicly assessing generative AI systems, something that has been high on the agenda and heavily discussed. Is our principles that to some extent are also grounded in some of the legislation that is being discussed in the TTC, including the Digital Services Act, among others. And so I might get back to this in terms of imagining what could be done and with the help of which stakeholders going forward. But come back to the room and give the floor now to Gemma Galdon-Clavel, the CEO and founder of Ethicas Tech. Over to you.
Thank you so much. I'm really grateful to be here, have been invited to this forum, learn so much about TTC issues, and also present what it is that we are working on at Ethicas. At Ethicas, we specialize in algorithmic audits, something that a lot of people have mentioned even in this panel, and I am convinced is going to be the main tool to understand, quantify, and mitigate harms in AI. We ourselves are hoping to be the first auditing unicorn that puts the tools that maximize engineering possibilities while taking into account fundamental rights and societal values on the table. And I'm very grateful also to be doing this here in Sweden, because I've been using the example of Volvo with policymakers for a long, long time now. And Volvo and seatbelts. Regulators didn't design seatbelts. Volvo designed seatbelts. Regulators said cars need to be safe. And Volvo took it to itself to develop something that made cars safer. And when they realized the potential of seatbelts, they didn't patent them, so they allowed for everyone to use them, and they created a standard. And then over time, regulators said, this works. Maybe what we need to ask the new incumbents in this space, in the automobile space, is that all cars that they put on the market have seatbelts. I think that's a great example of a collaborative relationship between the industry, the pioneers in the industry that want to do things better, that understand that when the regulator says safety, they're not trying to mess with their business model. They're doing their job. They're caring about our populations and the safety of people when using the results of innovation. And I often say that my job is to build the seatbelts of AI. What are the things, what are the pieces, what are the methods that will make sure that we can make the most of these new cars, this new innovation, while at the same time we are protecting people. And that's not an easy task. We're all struggling with this. The good thing is that we've gotten a lot better at understanding what the risks are and at developing those seatbelts. We call those seatbelts auditing, but there's lots of other tools. Cars are not safe just because of seat belts. We also need speed limits, we need brakes, we need red lights, but you understand the idea. We need an ecosystem of protections that make sure that anything that comes out of innovation is regulated in a way that makes the most of innovation, but also protects people to the best way possible. We've been pioneering algorithmic audits since GDPR, because we realized that the huge issue we're going to be facing with AI systems and data systems was implementation. The last mile of compliance is really difficult for everyone, for the regulator and for the industry, because unlike other industries, the impact of these AI systems is contextual. So you can have principles, you can have laws, you can have standards, but these are general. They apply to everything, while the impacts are very much contextual. So how do you cover that last mile? What is the dynamic piece of inspection that can allow us to make sure that you understand how these principles, laws, and standards apply to your case? And we specialize in this part, and we call it algorithmic audits. The good news is that audits are informally becoming the consensus on one of the potential ways of regulating AIs. We have audits in the wording of the DSA, an absolute pioneer. In Europe, we have audits in the New York City regulation of the hiring, the use of AI hiring systems. The very recent NTIA consultation process is focused on audits. The FTC keeps asking about what are the standards and the thresholds that need to be used in audits. So there's an emerging consensus. Then audits, call it inspection mechanisms. I think you were calling it valuations, validations. The name doesn't really matter. The things that we need inspection mechanisms that allow us to land the concerns of the policymakers while understanding the technologies that are making change possible. I am convinced that in a few years from now, not many years, 3-5 years from now, we'll be amazed that there was a time where we released AI systems without audits. We will not believe it, just like we now can't believe that in the 19th century you could buy cocaine in pharmacies. That stopped because of regulation and because we learned to do things better and protect people better. I think we're on the same track. And here comes generative AI with good news and bad news. The bad news, it detracts us from a conversation on the current actual harms of AI systems. One of my problems with policymakers is that they tend to focus on science fiction debates, thinking about what can happen in the long distance future, and forget there's an opportunity cost when we talk about science fiction and the long distance impacts. What happens to the current impacts that we are seeing right now? How do we protect people today, this generation, from the harms that we already understand and know are happening around those systems? So that's the bad, but there's the good. ChatGPT and generative AI points to the things that we can do better right now to protect people. We need to understand that the individual impacts are not enough when regulating. Alexandra was mentioning this. Societal harms need to be part of the regulation. We cannot stop at individual issues, and I think that the EU is making a huge effort for that. But legal systems are not always prepared to incorporate societal harms.
Gemma, I'm going to have to ask you to.
Sure, I'm wrapping up.
Yeah.
It's only three issues. The use case approach, and that's the second one, so it's only one. The use case approach that the AI Act is putting forward is great, but not enough. We need to focus on the technologies. The same use case can have lots of different technologies at play. And I think that with the use case focus, we are missing the opportunity to understand the impact of generative models in language, in image, and the separate impact of recommender and risk assessment systems. And the third thing,
super quickly,
AI needs teeth. The regulation needs teeth. We've been saying that the industry needs to do better, and right now the incentives to do better are not there. Our clients come to us to be audited because they think that's what they need to do, not because they're forced by anyone. And those that don't audit have no incentives to start doing it if they don't want to. I think that the regulation that is to come needs to have teeth. So my plea to the TTC would be to please start listening to the emerging consensus that's already there. It is transatlantic, it is very much global. There's things on the table that can already help us protect right now, tomorrow, today, the current generation that is suffering the negative impacts of some of these new technological developments.
Okay.
Thank you, and
very
apologies.
much, Gemma. Sorry for being a bit
fine.
pressing on you, but it's also a matter of giving everybody the possibility to to express themselves with a similar amount of time. We go back online to visit Brad Smith, Vice Chair and President at Microsoft. And Brad, thanks so much for being with us. I give you the floor for your presentation, your statement.
Well, thank you. And it's great to be with all of you, even if it's virtual. And let me just use my 4 minutes, if I could, to just offer a few thoughts, just listening to what everyone has said, because I think there's really a number of important points that have been made. And I'd offer 4. Number one, I do think and hope that innovation can progress as it has at a healthy rate, because I do think this technology can do good for the world. I think it can save people's lives, whether it's detecting cancer at an earlier stage or curing cancers that don't yet have a cure, or helping to identify where people are trapped in a natural disaster. It will do good for the world. Second, the safety side of the coin absolutely is equally important. We do need to be clear-eyed about the risks. I thought Dario captured them well. And so we need to move forward, the innovation and safety standards together. Third, already I would say this conversation to me is good news. If the European Union, the United States, the other members of the G7, India and Indonesia can move forward together, and if we can work with others on a voluntary basis, then we'll all move faster. And I think that's not just good news for the world. I think it's good news for the world of technology as well. So I would certainly welcome that, and I know Microsoft would. And then finally, I think it's important to think a little bit more about how to make this work. It's like anything that's complicated. There's a lot of details that need to be sorted through. And I think we'll all benefit early on by learning about what we want to go do. Part of what we need to keep learning about is the technology itself. And I think it's incumbent on those of us who are creating the technology to share what we're doing so everybody has access to that information. But the other side of this, I think, is learning about what I'll call the art of international coordination, fundamentally on technology regulation or technology standards. And as we think about these issues, especially as they apply to safety, I think there's a couple of sources that we can learn from, and especially with so many great people from civil society in the room, I think you all can help us. One is to learn, I would say, from the world of commercial aircraft, the International Civil Aviation Organization. If a flight goes from New York to Stockholm, it's the same plane. And so there have been advances in safety standards on an international basis. The second is, if you really want to study, in my view, the art of technology regulation for digital technology, study everything that the Competition Directorate General of the European Commission has done for 4 decades, going back to the 1984 undertaking with IBM. Some of them have involved Microsoft. There are a few conclusions here. One, there are certain things that I think must be global. Anything that's about transparency is inherently global, because once a report is published, the whole world gets to read it. So you might as well agree on a global approach. Second, certain things benefit enormously from international coordination, especially when it comes to product development processes. We're not going to advance safety or innovation if there's different approaches to, say, how a red team should work in the safety process for developing a new AI model. Other things, there's more room for divergence, and there will be some, because the world, even the countries that share common values, will have some differences. And there's areas around licensing or usage where one can manage with that divergence. But in short, there's a lot that we will benefit from learning now and then putting into practice.
Thank you very much, Brad, also for giving some hints on what to prioritize, let's say, in terms of international collaboration and global knowledge sharing. We go to our last panelist intervention. It's Daniel Gilblad from AI Sweden, the co-director of AI Sweden. Daniel, the floor is yours, and then we go into an open floor for a few minutes.
Thank you so much. Yes, as said, I'm Daniel Blad from Chalmers University of Technology and AI Sweden, and as such, we basically have a direct mission to accelerate the use of AI in Sweden and broader in Europe. So, first of all, it's a privilege to be here. It's also, again, of course, a privilege to be speaking last, because most intelligent things have already been said, so to speak. But I hope I can add a little bit of perspective and a few different kinds of thoughts to the conversation. First of all, as an AI researcher and adopter for a very long time, it's great to be living through a true revolution within AI. We're seeing new capabilities. Everyone has tried them out by this point. But during the last 3 or 4 months, I would also like to emphasize that we are seeing these type of technologies also move into completely different areas, such as drug design, cyber threat intelligence, etc., etc. And they're going to completely revolutionize some of these application areas within 5 to 10 years. So these areas might not be completely open. They might use models and systems and methods that might be a little bit close, but they will rely on open foundation models for image interpretation, for language interpretation, etc., etc. What we're seeing right now is the emergence of a new infrastructure. We typically talk about, as we did before, compute and storage and stuff like that. These models themselves are an infrastructure and will be an infrastructure. And building on that, a few years ago, we started to build the artifacts that constitute that infrastructure. We have built models for large language models for Swedish and the Nordic languages. Of course, it comes with some challenges, but we do think that we have a scalable working methods of doing this that is actually quite efficient and not too resource intensive. So this is something that we can really build upon. And of course, these kinds of models, we've talked about a lot of their limitations and so on in terms of alignment, hallucinations, and so on, but they can be reliably used in many, many specific applications already today, as you all know. However, we do worry a little bit that the current conversation on long-term risks and more existential risks are perhaps a little bit of a distraction from some of the real risks that we're actually facing right now in terms of inclusion, in terms of how this is going to impact users and the proper use of these technologies in governance and in civil service, etc., etc. This conversation might have to change a little bit. Of course, commercial actors will need to be responsible for the data use, and their services. That's absolutely clear. But to complement this, we really do think that open development and in Europe, support for this type of open development is actually crucial. We want to urge the Commission to actually help us drive this kind of development. So, in terms of collaboration, Europe and the US, of course, we do share a lot of values, not perhaps the same starting point when it comes to generative AI, because we come from different levels of resources and different directions, basically. But we have heard here today already that focus on transparency is basically a shared value. We need to understand these models. We need to understand what they're doing. I would also like to add perhaps a focus on sharing. We will all benefit from sharing what can be shared in terms of data, models, benchmarks, etc., etc., to continuously build upon to really, really foster transatlantic innovation and development. With that said, a common focus on this kind of reasonable transparency and basically sharing of resources as a complement to joint regulation, I think would be immensely beneficial. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daniel. So we have roughly 8 minutes before we have to close, not this panel, but the whole thing, okay? Also, because some of you have a hard stop. So what I want to do is, first of all, ask the panelists to start thinking about one statement that you want to give us in response to what you've heard in terms of a concrete thing that you think should be done in the TTC context. Before we hear from you about this, I would like to give the possibility to Secretary Blinken, Executive Vice President Dombrovskis, and U.S. Trade Representative Tai, if you have, unfortunately, very short contributions or comments that you want to give to this conversation.
No, thank you. I think this has been already extraordinarily, even a short period of time, informative and thought-provoking. I think the advantage that we have to some extent is that we don't have any inherited legacy structures or systems for doing this, which is both frightening, but also to some extent liberating, because it gives us some freedom to think hard, well, and fast, inspired, as we've heard from some things that have been done in other areas, but not captive to them. I think there's a strong consensus among the TTC members today that we do have an important role to play in helping to develop, at least initially, some kind of voluntary code of conduct to at least mind the gap between now and the problems that we're already seeing, and the time by which governments and other institutions are actually able to effectively legislate and regulate. And we know that that gap when it comes to technology is usually pretty significant. In the case of AI and generative AI, it may be the most acute yet. So I think we feel the strong urgency of now among all the members of the TTC to do this, but it has to be done in a broad and open way, because there are too many other both stakeholders who need to be involved and countries that have to be involved in this. It can't simply be a closed system or a closed club. So I think we're animated by that, and I expect you'll see the work of the TTC move forward in that direction.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Executive Vice President. Yeah.
Very briefly, I will not go into artificial intelligence because there are people who are much more knowledgeable about this topic than I am. But I just wanted to bring in this international and trade angle in this discussion for artificial intelligence to trade to train large AI models and for broader digital transformation of economy. It's also important to set the rules of the digital trade, including the questions relating to data flows, while ensuring obviously the data protection and privacy, but avoiding artificial obstacles on data transfers. And this is something which we also need to work on, both internationally at the WTO level, but also bilaterally, transatlantically, and with like-minded partners. Because as we are transitioning to this digital economy, it's going to be increasingly important part of our trade agenda. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much. I think that the perspective I wanted to bring was my instructions upon taking this job at President Biden's request was to bring a worker-centered approach to trade, to put the human being back into how we think about our economic policy making and our trade policy making in particular. And for us, that meant thinking about the human being, the human component in our economy as being more than just a consumer. And understanding that a consumer is also a worker, a wage earner, someone who looks to be productive, to earn a wage, to raise a family, and to provide, and to have hope for the future. This conversation around artificial intelligence, like Valdis, I feel like I'm the least intelligent here about the artificial intelligence. There's a lot for me to learn and catch up on, but it strikes me that maybe that same centering should be part of this conversation as well, which is to think thoroughly about what does it mean to be a human being in a world in which the tools that are available to us are transforming and developing so quickly. How do we ensure that what is important to the human experience can be served by these new tools as opposed to undermined or harmed by that? And what's the point of a cure for cancer if the experience in the world is significantly reduced in terms of its enjoyment or in terms of the expression of human potential? What does it mean to be human? It's a rather profound question. I don't have the answers, but it does strike me that in the midst of the practical and also the more theoretical into the future, it's a good place to center ourselves, because that is the one thing we share around the world is our humanity.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid we will not have time to collect the statements of the different panelists. For those of you that are here, we take you to the coffee room because I'm eager to have continue this conversation. I think we only have time to give first Executive Vice President Vestager and then Secretary Raimondo the chance to close this meeting with some final remarks. Again, short, because I know some of you have to leave very, very soon.
Well, thank you very much. I think this has been truly fascinating, both because of the perspective that has been painted here of what we are into with generative AI, but also with the focus that something needs to be done, and this is now. I find it very encouraging with the different inspirations as to what is needed. So the industry itself, the external view from the outside, and then of course the feedback loops to make sure that this is something that is developing. And we will be very encouraged to take it from here, to produce a draft, to invite global partners to come on board to cover as many as possible. And we will make this a question of absolute urgency to have such an AI code of conduct for a voluntary sign-up. And we will not forget that there are other sorts of artificial intelligence, obviously. There are a number of things that needs to be done, but the thing is that we need to show that democracy is up to speed. Because the legislative procedures, they must take their time. That is the nature of legislation. But this is a way for democracies to answer in real time at a question that is really, really in our face right now. And I've found this very encouraging to do it. And I'm looking very much forward to work with as many as possible, in depth and very fast. Thank you.
Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you. I just want to echo all of the thanks. Thank you all for being here. I thought what Catherine said was right and poignant, and said briefly, just because you can do it doesn't mean you should. And so as we figure out the benefits of AI, I hope we're all really eyes wide open about the costs and do the analysis of whether we should do it. And I think if we all are honest with ourselves about other technologies, including social media, we probably wish we had not done things, even though we could have, but should have we? And so let's work together to get this right, because the stakes are a whole lot higher.
Thank you very much. I want to thank you all. I think we've heard a very constructive spirit, multi-stakeholder, to proceed in this direction and in doing something concrete about generative AI in particular, and AI more generally. We also, I think, sensed that the TTC is also a good place to create the blueprint for then what is a larger coalition of like-minded countries going forward, taking action in this field. And so I want to thank all of you. We all learned a lot from this conversation. I will leave now the floor to Minister Forshell, who will formally close the meeting. But first of all, I will ask everybody to put your hands together for this fantastic group of panelists.
Thank you.
So, dear friends, this brings the TTC stakeholder dialogue to an end. And on behalf of the audience here and also those following this online, I would like to thank all the participants in the two panels for your valuable insights. And I would, of course, also like to thank the County of Norrbotten and the City of Luleå for receiving us. And also, of course, all the inhabitants of Luleå for letting us take over your hometown for 2 days. And you will now officially have it back. Once again, thank you very much.